Good evening and happy Sunday from our nation's capital, or at least my nation's capital. Uh, for those of you who haven't heard the news yet, I am going to be trying to facilitate a Moby Dick book reading club, and we have a Discord server that's been set up for that. You can find the link to that Discord server right underneath me in the description of the video. If you're interested in that, I'm hoping to have a firm plan on when we're starting a little later this week. So we haven't started yet. Just and once we do start, it's going to take a while because that's a big old book right there. So if you're interested, the Moby Dick Book Club server information is underneath in the video description. Um, for those of you who don't know, the reason I'm in Washington, D.C. is because I'm studying canon law, and most of it is not that terribly exciting, at least if you're not deep into church governance. But there is just a little reflection I have. One of the laws, or one of the classes I'm taking right now is the law on consecrated life. How do we handle religious orders, secular institutes, societies of apostolic life, or as you might know them more commonly, monks, nuns, friars, and sisters? How do we handle people like that? And there's a lot of detail in there, but the Code of Canon Law gives us kind of a broad roadmap of how you would get one of these societies going, how you'd get one of these groups going. And it does it, as far as I can tell, quite sensibly. It's not too much work up front, but it's also not left entirely unsupervised. So let's imagine that somebody's got a vision for something that the church needs right now in terms of making a consecrated life. You want to form some kind of new community or do some kind of new work. Well, the first step is just to see if you can get anybody else to sign up for that. It's that simple. You don't have to go necessarily to the bishop, or you don't have to go get any approval or anything like that. If you can get 2 or 3 people to agree that the work that you have laid out is worthwhile, then you can begin to just do that work. Now, if you're already part of the church in some formal capacity, if you're a priest or a part of another religious institute, you'd need permission from your superiors in order to actually begin on this. But if you just think that you want to try and do something new in the church, you're welcome to just go and try it. You don't need any formal approval or any kind of special permissions in order to get this thing going. And a lot of people do try this, and a lot of times it doesn't work out. People live together, try and have a common life, and cooperate towards some good aim together. And oftentimes within 5 years, it doesn't work out. These things are hard, and we don't necessarily have to say that somebody was bad if it just wasn't the right time. But sometimes these little movements, these little groups of people will be quite successful in whatever it is that they're doing. And they'll begin to attract more and more people to that. Maybe it's actually extremely popular. It is growing very quickly. Well, at that point, that's when you start interacting with the authority of the church. And you would have the local bishop review your statutes. See, at this point, you've got to start getting things in writing. How are we going to do this? What is our mission? What is it that we are up to? You got to start writing these things down. Here's how we handle things as they come up. Here's how we resolve disputes. Here's how we welcome new people into our community. If the bishop has had an opportunity to review your statutes, then you can become a private association of the Christian faithful. And if he gives his approval to them, he says, I've looked over these statutes and observed your way of life, then you can become a public association of the Christian faithful. And at that point, you can actually start doing things in the name of the church, because you've now brought yourself under the authority of the local bishop, and he's now somewhat responsible for supervising you, and you've by this point shown yourself reliable to the local church, that whatever it is that you're up to is worth attending to. So imagine that it keeps on growing, that you are maybe able to open up a second house for people to live in. The mission is cooking along. You've got two options right there. One of them is to become a Institute of Consecrated Life on diocesan right. You don't need to go much higher than the diocesan bishop for most of those things. Or you could appeal straight to the Holy See to become an institute of pontifical right, saying we want to have this level of approval, this level of authority. We don't want to necessarily go through the diocesan bishop stage. We want to go straight towards kind of being a universal mission there. At that point, you do a very thorough review of what you're up to. You're not just going to write a letter and get this approval. They might do a visitation. They need to know in detail what it exactly it is that you're doing. But if you do get to that level, then either on the diocesan level or even at the level of the Roman Pontiff, you become a fully fledged institute with all of the rights and responsibilities that are laid out in the church's law and tradition. And I just think it's a good system. I think that the church has done this many times before, is very cautious about letting people becoming too enthusiastic about some new movement or some great thing, letting it be tested stage by stage to see if it's suitable and going to work. It's all laid out in the law, and it's the right balance, I think, between people's free initiative to try things and the hierarchical authority of the bishop to regulate these things and make sure that it's all going well. So anyway, that's the most interesting thing that I learned about canon law last week. So hopefully that was interesting to you as well. Got another week of classes coming up here. Right now, taking two classes, Law for Consecrated Life, as I was just talking about, and then American Law for Canonists, which has been exciting, but a little outside my wheelhouse. Hello, Trey. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Father?
Doing all right. Doing all right. Just it's another Sunday night on the brink of another week of class. So
Nice. I did have some Tradcath questions, or at least traditional liturgy questions,
shoot.
but that's possible. So, what are most Catholic churches doing for their liturgy, like on average?
Sure. So I will say that most Catholic churches in the Latin Rite, which is the biggest part of the Catholic Church, 95% of Catholics, most of them are using some translation into the vernacular of the 2002 Roman Missal. So that's the third edition since the Second Vatican Council that's been published. Does that answer your question?
No, that doesn't really. Like,
Okay.
is a better response is probably just to get more deeply involved, because I was more a question of like, as an outsider, like, who goes to the traditional Latin Mass versus Novus Ordo?
Yeah, sure. So that whole 2002 Roman Missal thing I was talking about, that's commonly called the Novus Ordo, the new order of things. So
Okay.
that'd be the majority of things. So I mean, you're pulling on some pretty deep roots here, and that doesn't mean it's bad, but it's just hard to explain it to somebody who doesn't already understand it. Yeah, so the majority of Catholics would be attending the new order of Mass. That would be I would say 97%
Okay.
of people. The people who are rather attached to the traditional Latin Mass are a small, but oftentimes rather loud and opinionated minority. Um,
Okay. Yeah, because I went to a traditional Latin mass, and it um how do I say this politely? Um, it didn't really seem like people who were had doing this continually, but were doing this as a sort of um political message a little bit. Like it wasn't like this is what I do weekly. This is very much like a political stance against other people, or I'm doing this out of rebellion
hmm,
against some other idea.
interesting. What
And
gave you that impression?
I think sort of afterwards, um, like most people were talking about Pope Francis on like a local level. This was like one time that I went, and then the people I was talking to were just like, yeah, very much focused on Pope Francis. Very like saddened that like not as many people are doing,
Hmm.
you know, not as well
What?
doing the tradcast stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, could you just tell me broadly what part of the world you were in when you attended this?
Uh, uh, like
San Diego?
California.
Yeah. Was it
California, I would say like closer to Huntington.
Huntington? Okay.
It's like you're not in Orange County. It's like you're above Orange County.
Okay. So more Los Angeles than San Diego. Yeah.
Yes.
So something you're dealing with here is I'll give you a little bit of history. 1970 is when the first revision of the Novus Ordo came out. And it was in many places imposed by hierarchical authority. They really had to
Okay.
kind of press people into doing this. Like, this is the way we're doing things now. Second Vatican Council, all of that stuff. With a fair amount of shenanigans coming along with it. So people going far beyond what the Second Vatican Council would have asked for.
Uh,
It would
so
be
can I?
very it would be very difficult between 1970 and about 2007 for most people to actually find somebody who was doing the traditional Latin Mass. There would be these rare exceptions and these groups that were kind of halfway in, halfway out of rebellion until they went fully into rebellion. In 2007, Pope Benedict XVI, may he rest in peace, issued a piece of legislation that greatly liberated the traditional Latin Mass, such that you no longer needed to get special permission from the Pope to say it at a particular parish. He gave permission to any priests to say it if they wanted to. Basically, it was now much more
Mhm.
of a local decision of whether or not you would do it. And so at that point, you saw a great interest in it. People who had been champing at the bit to kind of get into it, and now that it was no longer mostly forbidden, people were just kind of curious and wanted to go check it out and find it out that they liked it. In 2021, a lot of those permissions were rolled back and new restrictions were put on it, such that in many places, probably in California, LA Archdiocese, I could see this happening. That places where it had been offered were kind of forcibly taken away. People who maybe had, put some serious time into money in building a community someplace had that pulled away from them by kind of a hierarchical action of which they weren't consulted on. All of that to say is that there are a fair number of people who are pretty angry at Pope Francis about this. And
Mhm.
that might be why you heard extra of that more than you were anticipating.
Yeah. But so what you're saying is, um, most most Catholic churches went to Novus Ordo, and it's very much you needed selectly opinionated people to bring back Latin rites. Like there was
Sure.
never a churches. Like was there ever churches who were like skirted outside of this whole Novus Ordo reaction and just continued their Latin rite?
There's a few places that were able to manage that. They are not all that terribly common. There's a famous. It's called an indult. It's basically like a permanent favor that you could get given to a few churches in England because they had a bunch of famous English people, including Agatha Christie, write to Pope Paul VI saying, "Hey, the Latin Mass is beautiful. You can't just get rid of this." So it's commonly called the Agatha Christie indult because you know she wasn't even Catholic and she thought getting rid of this was a mistake. So there would be a few of these places that had indults in there. There was a particular group of priests known as the Society of St. Pius X that wasn't really obeying and would just continue to do their own thing. Their leader, Archbishop Lefebvre, as far as I can tell, no relation to our Lefebvre, he consecrated 4 bishops without a papal mandate in 1988. And according to the Code of Canon Law, that's an automatic excommunication. So he and those 4 bishops were all excommunicated. And at that point, a number of the priests of the Society of St. Pius X split off and asked permission from Rome to found their own thing. And then they actually got like full approval from the Vatican to do this because Vatican didn't want any more splitting off, and these people wanted to come back and remain a part of it. So I actually, as tragic as the consecrations of 1988 were, they actually created a little bit of cover for what's called the Priestly Fraternity of St. Peter, which they might have actually been operating that parish that you went to. I know in that area that they have a parish in the LA Archdiocese. I'm having a hard time hearing you. Yeah, something. That's why I don't like wireless things.
Okay. Can you
Much
hear
better.
me?
Much
Okay.
better.
Good. So to me, it seems like to like the traditional Latin Mass is more of like
People
a
are doing it
political
to be rebellious.
or like a political semblance, right? Like
I don't know what you mean by political.
that I don't believe somebody would go to the traditional Latin Mass without telling anybody.
They're trying to make a statement by doing it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can certainly think of individuals who are a bit like that. But I would say there's also plenty of people who find it to be more spiritually satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
So you get a mix. And I full disclosure, I celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. I do it both privately and for the little community that we have in Fargo, the people who do it there. And so I'm going to pull rank on you and say I know more of these people than you do.
Okay.
And you get some of them who are kind of, annoying about it, maybe a little imperialistic about it. I've certainly never been annoying or imperialistic about anything. So I don't understand at all why they would ever be like that. That's not true. I was joking. But I'd say the majority of them are people who are very committed Catholics and appreciate the manner of prayer that's afforded by the old ways of doing things, where more is communicated via gestures and symbolism and less is communicated via talking, because
Right.
that is undeniably a difference between the two different missals. Is that the Novus Ordo is a lot talkier than the traditional Latin Mass, which usually just communicates everything by making the priest genuflect 100 times at the altar. You do a lot of genuflecting, a leg workout doing it.
Okay. Do you think there's a difference between people going to the Latin Mass who have never experienced it versus the ones who are sort of recollecting and like, oh, I miss the Latin Mass in my childhood, the one that my father attended.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the majority of the people, at least in Fargo, that's my main sampling right there, is people who way too young would not have grown up with it.
Mhm.
I guess we have one parishioner that went to an FSSP parish. She grew up with it, you know, um, but she would be pretty exceptional in that group. Most of them discover it as young adults and say, "This is good. I kind of like it." Now
Mhm.
there is something um, with people who are highly committed um, and really appreciate. There's one aspect of the Novus Ordo that you get is it's or the traditional Latin Mass is that it's extremely orderly.
Yes.
You've got like the very strict hierarchy about these things. People have their jobs. They're expected to do it in an orderly manner, um, which I think is a feature and not a bug. But what you're really going to attract with that is really orderly people, people that if they were to take Dr. Peterson's Big Five personality test, would probably be more likely to be high in conscientiousness.
Mhm.
And when you get groups of high conscientiousness people about, um, they love fighting over little detailed things because of their high conscientiousness and their love for orderliness. They notice, like they are capable of perceiving more of these detailed things. Um, so
Mhm.
you do see that a bit, where maybe get an excess of orderliness, and that's one of my worries about these Latin Mass parishes, especially now that it's kind of like, oh, is it good? Can we still do this? I thought Pope Francis was getting rid of this, being cut off from kind of the full body of the church, just having this small group there. Um, that can run into problems. And just to also put full disclosure out there, I think that Pope Benedict had the right idea, and that the church is big enough to handle this kind of diversity. So,
Okay. Because I guess I was interested, like the comparison between like Orthodox and traditional Catholics is that if you probably go to an Orthodox parish, there's going to be more people who are less thinking about all the complexities, right? Like this is just something I do, versus traditional Catholics have to really set themselves apart to be a
mhm,
traditional Catholic.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there's a certain amount of that higher bar for participation. People will often drive a very long distance to find traditional Catholic, traditional Latin mass. So yeah, there's a certain amount of that.
Hmm. Um, and then hot take, hot take. Um, I think I would rather have a um, Jay Dyer type internet person or like very, nerdy type person go to an Orthodox church than a trad cath church, I think.
What
Because
makes you say that?
I think it's because the larger range, and I think the more, I guess, the more people you meet at church who don't think about church makes you levels you out, I guess.
That that's actually pretty daggone true. It is useful. That was what I was just talking about of, having the full body of Christ there, including the people who are, let's say, closer to the edges,
Yeah.
where they, aren't like, they don't have the Roman Catechism memorized. Um, they don't listen to all of Trent Horn's podcasts or whatever. Um, they're a little more worldly. Gives the people who kind of live at church, like me, gives the people like who basically live at church a little more contact, mediated contact with the rest of the world, and keeps them grounded. So that's exactly what I'm talking about of having them cut off. But you're saying that if we'll just say the Jay Dyer types end up at an Orthodox parish, there's going to be some lovely grandmother there who's been doing this her entire life, basically keeps the place running and doesn't worry so much about these theological nitpickings as she does, keeping the church running and taking care of people.
Yeah, like I just think that if you have a young kid and he's gonna be really interested, like either side, he's gonna be like talking to the grandmas and being like, "Have you heard of like this council and what this church father said?" And then the grandmother's gonna give her glazed eyes and just say, "I don't know what you're talking about."
No,
But
she'll be very polite. She'll be very polite, say, "Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that." That's
yeah,
how they'll actually act. But then she'll like, "So, are you married? I've got a granddaughter over here."
yeah.
She'll switch over to what's most important.
So what job do you have? How's that
Yeah,
going?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, you get some of that. Yeah. What can you do? I just show up and say mass. That's what I do.
Do you think it would be possible? Because I feel like that would be a great solution. Is to have the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo at the same time. I know that probably isn't possible, but
What do you mean at the same time? Like in the
um,
same parish, but like you've got the Latin Mass at 7:30 and the Novus Ordo at 10:30.
I mean that there's a Latin Mass hall right next to it. So um, this is very particular. It probably isn't possible, but what Joe's Witnesses would do is that there would be an English congregation, and then there would be a Russian group, and there'd be a side room where the Russian group would meet. So
Hmm.
then, basically, what would happen is the Russians would have their meeting in Russian, and the witnesses would have their meeting in English, and then afterwards they would all mix pretty much after everybody would be let out. And then it would
Yeah,
cross over.
yeah. So the limitation you would run into is the Catholic Church has a very strong preference for, first off, to have Mass take place in a sacred space. We are
Mhm.
allowed to do it in any suitable place if necessity requires it. Um,
Mhm.
but it is much, especially if it's going to be a regular thing, having a sacred space, a church to do it in. Um, and then, in a parish, really only having one church, um, the main place where the whole body gathers, rather than splitting people off into to separate places. So that and the expense, you want it to be nice. If you had like, we've got the Latin Mass church over here, the Novus Ordo church over here, it'd be like, because we got to build two churches. It's a little much.
Yeah.
So I don't. The best I can do is having them at the same parish, giving people the option of which they want to attend, and having a big barbecue where they can all rub shoulders, because a lot of the Latin Mass folks have a lot of kids, and you could entice families to a picnic if you give them hot dogs for cheap, because they've
Yeah.
got a little mouths to feed, um, and then a playground for the kids to run around on, so the parents can talk to other adults. So that's the best I can get you. And like that kind of arrangement was common in the era 2007 to, 2021.
Really.
Yeah, because like there would be, let's say you've got a parish where 1,000 people go to church regularly. They've
Mhm.
got one Saturday evening mass and two Sunday morning masses. And then you've got kind of all around the town, maybe, I don't know, 150 people who are curious about the Latin Mass and want to make it happen. And a couple priests who are willing to learn it or to celebrate it. They would find a parish and usually kind of just set up shop there. It was perfectly illegal and allowed. Maybe they would shift the mass schedule around. A lot of times they'd end up either doing it late in the evening or in the afternoon, just because that's when the church wasn't being used. And it would just be kind of a part of it. So that's how it worked in my diocese up until recently. At the cathedral, they would have on a Sunday they'd have their 3 Novus Ordo masses, 8, 10, and noon, and then at 2 p.m. they would have the traditional Latin Mass. At 2 p.m. on a Sunday, you're really getting the people who want to be there, because that's not prime church going time right there. That's usually prime nap time.
Yeah.
But now they've had to move because of the Traditionis Custodes says you can't have it in parish churches anymore. They've got to go to the high school chapel, which is not as big and not as nice. And the HVAC system in there is really loud and annoying.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's what I think.
Do you think Novus Ordo allowed the continuation of like generations within young people, or do you think it failed at that view? And why do you think that?
I don't know what you're asking. What do you mean allowed continued generations?
Like that just like people having kids, that the kids would stay around, continue in church.
So it's really hard to separate what's going on here, because a lot was happening at once. 1970 is when it was all kind of implemented there.
Mm.
And so we can't really isolate the variables. In a lot of places, the priests were going kind of overboard. They were doing strange things that nobody was really asking for.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay. And then all of a sudden we see, church attendance plummeting. You see priests and nuns requesting dispensations for their vows en masse, so a lot of them leaving, drop off in attendance. And it's hard to suss out what exactly is causing all of that. Was it the fact that any change whatsoever happened? Was it the fact that centuries-old tradition had been suddenly upended? Was it the general sense of revolution in the air, and this was all going to, come collapsing and crashing down, even if the church hadn't changed its liturgy, just because of the cultural revolutions of the time? It's hard to suss all of that out. Part of it, part of the reason why I'm generally pretty pro Vatican II, but with lots of nuances and lots of opinions about what Vatican II is actually about, is where was I going with that? Oh, yeah. Some people will look at Vatican II and they'll say, well, gosh, Vatican II obviously must have ruined it. Look at all the bad things that happened afterwards. And it's like, yeah. Or you could look at it and say, look at how quickly everything collapsed. It must not have been all that solid to begin with. And I think that's, we can say, so that's what I think.
Gotcha. Because I'm just sort of interested in the transition in South America between mainstream Catholicism and evangelicalism. And it seemed that like if Novus Ordo was like really successful, it should have been able to outbeat evangelicalism in a lot of ways.
Yeah. There's that. One of the things that you run into in South America is the KGB infiltration of the universities. the promotion of liberation theology.
Liberation theology, yeah.
Yeah, and the sense that the Catholic Church had become entirely political, and was just constantly talking about politics, whereas the evangelicals would come in and they talk about the gospel. So there was some of that, and then and this is just something that I just have to accept, is a lot of people would much prefer to have guitar music and highly charged emotional worship than the heavenly beauty of the traditional Latin Mass.
But then you said that, like, but I'm a little, because I'm also confused on that, because it seems like you're saying that no, Latin communities or Latin rights communities are more successful than Novus Ordo communities, or do you say that's not true?
I mean, ask me in about 200 years.
Okay.
Because I'm telling you, man, they have a lot of kids, and so the real question is, how many of these kids are going to deconstruct?
Right.
Because if it's a brittle faith that falls to pieces at the first sign of trouble, then the Latin Mass isn't really going to go anywhere. But if we'll say a plurality of the kids do so, they could have an impact on the and we'll say they grow up, they not only stay Catholic but retain their preference for the traditional Latin Mass and don't just start going to a Novus Ordo parish. Especially with the demographic cliff that the church is facing now, it's basically like whoever's left gets to run the place.
Really?
Yeah, because it's continual. It's been since the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
It's just been continual decline in participation, and it's still the case that old people are the biggest block, and they die the most frequently.
Yeah. What's your solution to that?
My solution to that is to pray. And if God tells me to do something, I should probably do it. It's way too big for me to fix this, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what's happened in the past when the church has, fallen on hard times like these is God raises up saints, holy people, and they kind of figure out the answer to these things. And the church embraces that. And so I think especially of St. Francis of Assisi, kind of in the 13th century there, when the church had become extremely worldly, the Lord sends him with this spirit of, frankly, frightening and irresponsible poverty. And St. Francis reminds the church of basically what the gospel says about wealth is that it's spiritually dangerous to have it. So, yeah. Would love to hear a video on Vatican II and how the spirit might be different from the implementation. Yeah, that was Don here is talking about a video that Cale Zeldin did about the text, and I'm not sure, Don, if you've got that quite right. I think it's the text of Vatican II versus the implementation of Vatican II, and that's a really interesting question. It's like, okay, which one of these is actually Vatican II? Because you've got the nerds like me who've actually bothered to read the texts and could see all the places where the Council Fathers were at care to be in continuity with what had come before them. But most of the people would have thought that Vatican II was what was actually happening in their parish, and which one of them is actually correct. And since we're having a dispute about this, my take is the thing that we can all point to and hold in common is the text of the Vatican II and the tradition of the church. And so that's what we should be using. But people aren't wrong to just see what's happening and say, well, I guess that's what Vatican II is. So, because what else would they point to? What else would they look at there? Clara is asking, thought the younger clergy were more on board with the traditional mass. As a percentage, we generally are. Hello, John.
Hey. Oh, hi. I actually didn't think you'd let me on. I'm sorry.
Why wouldn't I let you on?
I don't know. I just thought you didn't like me.
Oh, okay. Well,
Sorry.
I don't know you well enough to dislike you yet. So,
Okay.
but if you keep it up, we might be able to get there.
I might have done something to make you dislike me. I'm sorry.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got any thoughts about Vatican II and the traditional Latin Mass, or?
No, I don't know really anything about Catholicism. I've been to a couple of Catholic churches, but yeah, that was just like maybe 4 times. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So I made a video, and I included you in it, and I'm sorry I did, because honestly I thought you were going to be like, I don't know, not very nice to me, and so I feel bad about including you in it. I meant it as a joke, because I thought, whatever, maybe I read into things too much sometimes, but I thought you didn't like me and were saying a lot of things. But
interesting.
Yeah,
so what's this video all about?
I discovered that Mark is a pedophile and had facial reconstructive surgery.
Yeah, I don't think so. You're really going to have to bring the goods with that in order to convince me of that. So why don't you just try it again next week here? Yeah. Got the impression that he saw it like a Pandora's box, that people ran much further with it than what it intended. And there's something I can hear in the older clergy. Some of the stories I heard, or maybe it wasn't universal, but there was this real pattern of, let's say, you go to seminary and the seminary is like bolting you down real tight, and it's using a monastic model of formation. Whenever, you've got that kind of control over somebody, you've always got the possibility of abuse happening there. And then people get these priests got to their first parishes, and I would just hear these stories about frankly abusive behavior from their pastors, and all of that kind of, it sounds like it was just getting passed on and on and on. And the younger clergy back in the 60s and the 70s kind of rebelling against everything, and some of what they're rebelling against wasn't actually good. So it's yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. And that's a lot of what you hear about the late 60s too. You see that especially with like Beatlemania, is like, it's like maybe things were a little too clamped down, and yeah, stultifying order with a lack of change there. Well, the reason is, Clara, is because I'm only here in this room for 2 months. All of my books and all of my things are back in my home, and I am I'm only here for a couple months, and I flew out here, and my baggage was already overweight, and I had to pay extra for it. So this room is commonly rented to priests who are studying at Catholic University of America, and I'm sure some of them actually get to spend a good long time here and can make use of all these shelves. But since I'm only here for 2 months, it's not really being used much. Oh, okay. Well, there's all sorts of people in this city. Some of them like to ride motorcycles past my window at 2:00 in the morning. Those are not my favorite people. Hello, Mark.
Hey, how's it going?
Life's good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Have
up
you
north.
have you
Raining.
been more training?
No, it's raining up here.
Oh, it's raining. Okay.
Yeah, it just started yesterday and today.
All right. All right.
But it's good. I get to see my grandmother. She's 96.
Holy mackerel. Is she like a spry 96 or
She's
we don't know how much longer we're going to have her 96?
They called in hospice 96. So,
Mhm.
but she knew where I was. She knew who my uncle was.
That's good. That's good.
She's not using the walkers the way she used to, which I was like, you used to have the walker right next to your chair, and now you walk to your walker. Interesting. But yeah, it was good to see her because that might well be the last time. So
Yeah.
and I'm not up here all the time. So although I will be up next month again, for better or for worse.
Cool.
Yeah. How's DC treating you?
Yeah. I tell you what, this is going to sound like it's a small thing, but it's really not. So like the first week that I'm here, my room is just so hot. We don't have central AC in here. We've got these ceiling fans, right? And I'm running the ceiling fan full blast, and it just doesn't seem to be doing all that much. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die this summer. Like I can't get to sleep. I don't sleep well. And then I just look up at the ceiling fan. I'm just like, wait a minute. There's an extra switch on there. So I switch the switch, and it starts blowing air down rather than up.
Yep.
And that made a huge difference. I've been sleeping much better just because it actually cools my room now. So I wonder how many like years guys have been staying in this room and the ceiling fans have been blowing air up at the ceiling rather than down.
Well, but it's set. That's the winter setting. The summer setting that's really what it is. Because in the winter you want it the other way around.
You want to pull the air up in the winter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Does it really matter with a 10-foot ceiling?
Yeah, it does. That's what you experienced.
I suppose.
That was actually that was the big change. I mean, John's got you all the way at Revelation. That's great.
Look, I'm sleeping much better. I'm in a much better mood. So I'll take it. I'll take the revelation.
That's pretty much how it works. You're a dumbass, and then something happens that obviously you weren't smart enough to figure out, and yet you did. Revelation.
That's how revelation works.
You don't get any knowledge. It all comes down from above, and you're just not grateful enough for that. But yeah, it was our Patriarchy is Good video has done well. It's got 127 views, so it's cranking along.
Yeah, I was on Mark's channel earlier this week. You guys need to go check that out. I'll let's put the link out there, huh?
Yeah, put the link out.
Over here on my other screen.
Somebody who has a different name from me is available in Google. Wonderful. I was searching for my grandmother's last name. She had 3 last names. She's got a maiden name and 2 married names. I just couldn't remember the third one. It's like, why can't I remember this? So searching for Lefevres all over the place. And boy, there's a lot of us. We're everywhere. Yeah, there you go. That's good. It's a good link. It was a good talk. I thought it went well.
Yeah, it was getting some of those things all laid down.
Well, I think too, once you realize sort of the history of feminism, it's like, wait, what? because it's not what everybody thinks, right? So everybody thinks it's about certain things, and not really. The documents they're using are quite old, although not old enough to be relevant, but old enough to be proven to be bad, because all the bad literature came out of that time. So there you go.
Yeah. There's something
With very
about that.
few exceptions.
I don't want to spoil it for people. Yeah.
I never lived in Florida, by the way. So I visited Florida, but back home now in Boston, where I grew up. It's not that hard. Here's trouble.
Is he trouble?
Let's find out.
I don't know. Am I trouble?
That's up
doing?
to you.
Reasonable amount.
Good to see you on camera finally.
Yeah, good to be here. I figured I'd hop in and add some hair, if nothing else.
Yes,
Hey.
you have an abundance.
Yeah.
Now
And
we're
also to
complete.
say that also going to say that the Patriarchy is Good video was good.
Oh, you liked it? Good.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
We'll have to do a longer one at some point, maybe.
A longer one. That was already 2 hours long.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Need a 3-hour video on top of that to round it out. Really dig into the meat.
Well, I felt like I got my payload delivered pretty quickly on that one. Must be because I practice taking complicated concepts and putting them in a simple, streamlined order for a living.
Is that what you do?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's part of what I do. Many things. I would say the key argument of the video. I mean, my key argument of the video is that I didn't put it quite like this, but marriage is not supposed to be a two-headed monster. Somebody ultimately needs to be the one carrying the responsibility. Biblical doctrine has been that the man is the one who is supposed to carry the responsibility for the family, and the woman would be the suitable helpmate to that. When you have the responsibility, you need the rights to carry it out. So that's my part of the argument.
That was one of the many arguments. Yes, I don't think there's a key argument.
So there isn't a key argument.
Once you find out that none of it has any goodness in it, you go, "Oh, that's interesting. There's no goodness here at all. Oh, weird." And that's explicit from the beginning of the movement, which turns violent.
Mm-hmm.
It's like might be a hint.
Right. The whole thing's individualist. It's
Right.
It's people deciding they prefer autonomy over having healthy relationships.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. I like that phrasing. Yeah, I'm going to steal that and not credit you for sure. I like that. Yeah, I mean that's intimacy crisis ultimately, which I do mention in there. Yeah, you can be an individual, right? Or you can have intimacy with the world and other people. It's up to you. Like really, but you have to pick one. And then the nice part about the responsibility, because that's no one talks about responsibility. Everybody talks about rights. No one talks about responsibilities. All right.
And now that I'm studying canon law, like the church is really consistent on this, right? So it talks about a pastor. The first thing it does is, okay, we're going to get a few preliminary things so we know what we're talking about. These are the pastor's responsibilities. This is what he's supposed to do. And in order to accomplish them, he hits these rights and these powers in order to accomplish his responsibilities. Right. It's like, oh my gosh, that just fixes things so much better. And we could even read the United States Constitution in this way, right? It's like, okay, we're going to do self-governance in this country. Therefore, you need to have these rights in order to carry out. You have the duty to participate in the governance of your country. Yeah. And therefore you get these rights and obligations to fulfill the obligations, So, okay, if you see something important that you think needs to be done, you have an obligation to step up and try and say it. Therefore, you have the right to free speech. You have the right to run for office. You have the right to assemble with like-minded people. All of that coming from your responsibility to participate in the governance of the country. All of that coming from that obligation. You have an obligation to stand up against government tyranny, and therefore the right to bear arms shall not be infringed.
It's amazing how well the pattern works.
It's beautiful. It's just, it's amazing. I love our country.
All right. I'm going to hop off. My noisy kids just got back. So,
okay. Your lovely, lovely children deserve your attention.
Yeah.
So I give you the right to go attend to them. You take care.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's sort of missing from the conversation. That and the ability to put things in frames. It's like you can make everything about opposition. You can make everything about politics. You can make everything about economics. You can literally put anything in that frame. So some things fit better than others. But the fact that you can do that doesn't mean that's what they are.
Right. Well, and like we could do a reductio ad absurdum with that, right? It's like you can consider the whole world in terms of bald people and not bald people.
And you should. That's the best frame ever. Because
And it's
bald
like-
people are the best, and you should convey all the authority to them, and everybody else should suffer mercilessly at our hands.
You're aware that Klaus Schwab is bald, right?
Ah, damn it. It doesn't work. But I like that frame. It's my favorite frame.
It doesn't. So it's like, okay, you could frame the whole world like that, but what exactly is it going to accomplish?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. It doesn't yield you anything useful to just see.
Right.
Clara is not like us,
Outcast.
Outcast.
Well, and you can do the same thing with politics. You can make everything political. Or you can make everything economic. Oh, people don't do that because of money. And it's like, all right, but most transactions occur without money. Now what? Right? It's like, oh, that's why economics people are always wrong about everything. See Nassim Taleb. He does a great job of pointing out that pretty much they're all. He says in the book they're all frauds. He backed off of that later, but
yeah.
I appreciate the hyperbole. So I was like, yes, they're all frauds.
It's like economics will only help you understand that which is bought with money.
Almost entirely. There's some exceptions. Stephen Dubner, he's an exception. I mean, I think that's what Taleb read and said, oh, wait a minute, some economists are not stupid. That's Freakonomics. If you haven't read the Freakonomics books, highly recommend. Taleb and the Freakonomics books, great stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That it really, because one of the things it does is it teaches you how little you understand about the world. And the other thing it does is it teaches you better ways of looking at things. And like Taleb to me was a revelation only in that I'm like, oh, I thought it was the only one that could see the world this way for a very long time. And now I realize I'm not alone. Peterson was the same experience for me. There were a couple of things in particular that Peterson said that I was like, I thought I was the only person that knew this. I'm glad somebody else does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. It's like your economics has to be able to take into account people just buying things on a whim.
Well, or the adverse effect that money has, right? So the first story, I think it's the first story in Freakonomics, is about a daycare. And the daycare has a problem. And the problem is people are picking their kids up 10 minutes late. And they're like, we got to do something about this. So they come up with a brilliant plan. They say, you know what we're going to do? We're going to charge people an extra $25, which is like a quarter of the total price if they pick their kids up late. So people can pick their kids up 25 minutes late and just pay the money. I mean, now they have more kids late. They had no idea that was going to happen, even though somebody like me would have said, bad plan, dude. Right? Because once you put a value on it, now you can do an exchange. And now you think it's a fair exchange. But like really their intent was to discourage the behavior, but you encouraged it instead. And economists kind of sort of know this, although they phrase it wrong because they're all pretty much dumb. The whole thing about, well, if you make something cheaper, more of it will get used. And that was one of the cases against the Affordable Care Act, for example, which also came true, by the way. This is a complete disaster, in other words. Less healthcare for everyone and less quality for everyone, all at the same time. Communism in action, folks. That's effectively a principle, right? Is that once you make a transaction sort of ritualized, I pay you money, you keep the kid longer, you encourage that transaction because now we have a way to do it. Whereas if it's ambiguous, well, I'm not supposed to keep my kids late, you're less likely to do it because you'll feel bad because you don't have a way to reciprocate. And we're very cooperative creatures, right? This is why the opponent processing thing makes me insane. That's not us. Humans are not like that ever. It just doesn't happen that way. Other things happen.
I would almost think
opposition.
Giving people a discount every month that they pick up their kids on time every day.
Nope. No, because people aren't motivated by money. Like this is why economics fails. People are never motivated by money.
Well, you at least wouldn't put the perverse incentive in there of like I could just pay $25 and be late.
Well, you wouldn't do
anything. But even the offer there would be a signal, even if nobody actually took it up on there.
Exactly. That's the problem. Is it signals matter, and sometimes you shouldn't point at bad things even to avoid them, because maybe they're going to happen anyway. But if you point at them, they'll happen more often to more people. Mm-hmm. That happens all the time. It goes down the rabbit hole of, well, now you can pay for convenience. You couldn't pay for convenience, but you couldn't buy it. So people would feel guilty and rush to get home and use that as an excuse for work. Right? But even in an economic frame, it doesn't work because if you think about it for 4 seconds. So these kids are in daycare. Why? Both parents are working for sure. Like,
or it's a single mom who's working.
Right.
Yeah.
So if they work longer, and this is good economics. Taleb points this out all the time. Like in the U.S., if you work more than 40 hours a week, you make a disproportionate amount of money. I think Peterson talks about this too, right? You make a disproportionate amount of money. In other words, for every hour over 40 you work, you make much more money. It's not linear at all. It's completely parabolic. So what happens is, even though that's a quarter of the total price, I think it was a quarter, it might have been less, but it doesn't matter, right? Even though it was a significant portion of the price, it's a good economic deal for dollars, right? Because you're actually going to make more money just by staying, 15 minutes late every day. Mm-hmm. Affordable is different for different people. And if you're in daycare already, who cares? Like you already have too much money.
Well, I was just going to point this out, that this is how the church got in trouble with indulgences. Which is why, like we have traditionally 3 acts of satisfaction, which you could use to get off purgatory time, just to put it really simply. That's prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. And, we did that for indulgences, prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. But we don't do almsgiving anymore because it feels a little bit too much like paying to, whereas, if you're praying and if you're fasting, it if you're fasting, right? It's like, I'm doing this for you, God. Definitely not doing it for me.
Yeah, it's very sacrificial, right?
Yeah. Whereas the almsgiving, that could become a little bit transactional there. I think that's how beggars make their money.
Yep.
And, I run into beggars more often, and I don't always do well, but a lot of times I will force myself to stop and talk to the person and figure out and then tell them no, which I actually think is more humane than just walking past them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Giving them the intimate connection that they're missing and saying no.
Yeah.
I'm happy to interact with you as a human, but I'm not going to transact with you.
Yeah. And most of the time, I think they're. Most of the time, I don't think they're telling me the truth there.
Yeah.
And maybe they're not even capable of telling the truth. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think people are motivated by money ever, with few exceptions. There are exceptions, right?
Well, sure, that's how they go to work.
Most people, yeah, but no, most people aren't motivated. I mean, look, I've never met a person ever in my life that I didn't immediately say, "Oh, I know how you can make more money," and none of them ever took any of that advice ever. And
Right,
actually,
well,
that happens all the time.
it depends on what we mean by motivated or by money. Because as Aristotle would teach us, money is, and you don't need to be Aristotle to figure this out, money is for the sake of something else.
Exactly.
You have money
it's
so
a
that
simple-
you can use it for something else. And so, it's very common that, and you see this a lot with teachers, right? They don't make a whole lot of money to begin with. The guy's a really good teacher, is very popular among the students. He loves his job, but he's got kid number 5 just showed up. And even though it's not linearly expensive, he's got these expenses to pay. So he goes and he takes a job in an administrative position. He's a principal, he's a superintendent, work that pays better, but isn't quite as fulfilling for him.
Right.
But it's not the money that's motivating him. It's the taking care of his family that's motivating them.
Well,
And
what
when
motivates?
you forget that step right there, you start sounding like a crazy person.
Right, but what motivates Catholic school teachers?
Yeah, they're not making
money. I can tell you that.
Yeah, it's definitely not the money, that's for sure.
Right, and you don't want to motivate people with money, right? Because this is one of those things that since I was a kid, I was always like, is everybody like, what's wrong with all the humans, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, money makes people greedy, and that same person will then say, what we need to do is give more money to poor people. And I'm like, so you think money makes people bad, but you want to give more of it to the people that by your definition are better? Are you trying to make them bad? Like, I'm confused. Like, always confused by that. Still happens, by the way. I've been telling people about this for years. I'm like, are you okay? You okay, bro? Like, are you sure you're okay? Like, oh, we got to pay teachers more money. Well, first of all, teachers make a lot of money. Public school teachers make a lot of money by the hour, like a lot.
Sure, 6 hours.
They're not underpaid,
summers off,
even a little bit. Yeah, if you do it hourly, like a normal person, they make lots. But like, why? And you can see, right, in the U.S., we tripled the education budget. Thanks, George W. Bush and other bad Republicans. And education just takes a nosedive, like in direct proportion to how much money you're spending on it. Like that thesis seems to hold true. So why do we want to give more money to? Like, I don't understand. But if you're right, you don't want more money going to poor people, teachers. Like you don't want. That's the opposite of what you want by your own admission, and yet you persist in this weird contradiction. Mm-hmm. And I think, and that's part of it, is we don't see contradiction at all. Like I was listening to a video recently, it's one on Manuel's channel, and I don't want to make an is claim, but it's necessary phenomenologically, and I'm like, I think you think those two statements are different, but those two statements aren't different. So, like, I get that, you don't want to say something is, but saying it's necessary phenomenologically is exactly the same thing. So why you don't see this, I don't know, but it's like we are living in that world where people they're not seeing errors. Like, they're not seeing any errors anywhere. They're just accepting everything that comes.
It's almost as if we live in a fallen world. You talk about not paying teachers more. It makes me think about how oftentimes, like, great trials and tribulations in the church are when the greatest sanctity is manifest. And like in the immediate post-Reformation period and the Counter-Reformation and all of that, just a lot of people were like, hey, we're going to start doing this right. Great reforming zeal, the fruits of which are still with us today. Partially because I think when you start stripping these things down and stripping them away, the only thing that's left are the people who really care about the mission there.
Exactly.
So like exactly. if you don't pay teachers, we'll say as much as we're not going to pay teachers as much as doctors. I think that fits.
Well, but I mean, there's other. I mean, you want to pay them below a wage they could make somewhere else, because you don't want them there for the money anyway. And again, it turns out that Catholic school teachers on average get paid less, but those are considered better educations. That might be a hint. Like, I don't know. I'm observing the world and saying maybe the world is telling us something very clearly.
You're selecting for the people who really want to be there and put the work in. Yeah. People who really believe in the mission rather than are motivated by a paycheck. And I think it has to do with you have to bring a certain amount of care. We'll just stick with education. You have to bring a certain amount of really caring, not only for the subject, but for the individuals who are in front of you, and wanting to do that all excellently in order to be a really good teacher. Like, you really have to care. And so when you pay them not as much as a surgeon will say, you select for the people who really want to be there. Yeah. Whereas I don't think that it's quite the same with every profession. And we could even look at surgeons. Like, surgeons have a different set of motivations than teachers do. Right. I think a lot of them would be motivated by like an interior drive to excellence. Look, good surgeons here. Interior drive for excellence. I mean, they probably care about their patients too. That's probably like the number one thing. But there's a little more drive for excellence and status. There's probably some status stuff in there. Status games they play.
Yeah, well, and some people want convenience or need convenience. Right. And so that's what we had the academy for, right? When we had one. Peterson's right. We lost universities, folks. Long time ago, by the way, but like they're definitely lost. Right. Those tenure and things like that are designed so that to free them up and make them make things convenient. One of my friends actually told the story where he said he was in the office talking with his professor, and his professor's a famous guy. He helped invent the modern hard drive, right? And he said there was this argument going on in the community about whether or not these super small magnets would have this particular behavior. And I'm not going to bore you with all the technical details, only half of which I remember anyway. And he went, "Oh, I could do that. Like, we could just solve that. Like, we could put that argument to bed with an experiment." And he said, "Well, you have to get the magnets down to the size." "Oh, I think I can do that." He said, "Well, how long would it take you?" He said, "Probably like an afternoon." And he's like, "What?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, we could just do that. Like, we have all the stuff from other experiments. I can do some about 6-7 hours of work, and we could have it in a couple of afternoons, no problem." And he was like, "Really?" And so they just answered the dumb question. Because the dumb question, it means nothing. It doesn't change physics, but it adds something to physics, but like nothing practical.
It's so yeah. So I think what we're talking about here, Clara, is filtering. Like a quick filter for high care positions. Right. That's what I'm talking about there. It's something where you really have to put your person into it rather than just, let's say, putting money in the till, scanning items, right? I think especially like at the priesthood, right? It's like, guys don't get into this for the money, right?
Yeah.
I'm well taken care of. I can buy whatever I want. I can even go on vacations, but it's not big money, right? And then there's also, like the whole celibacy thing and the whole once you promise to do this, you're in it for life, and then it's whole, promising respect and obedience, not only to your current bishop, but to his successor, who you can't possibly know who that's going to be.
Yeah.
Really, like the next guy could be really evil, who knows?
Yeah. Well, but
okay,
also
you put all of those layers of filtering. You're not going to make a whole lot of money.
Yeah.
You've got to embrace celibacy. You got to have obedience, not only to this guy that you might like, but even to the next guy. You have to get through all those layers of filtering before you can get to be a priest. You got to say, oh yeah, being a priest means enough to me that I'm willing to put up with all of these things in order to do it.
Yeah, but also, I mean, yeah, it's not about teachers. It's about economics and the fact that money has the opposite effect that everybody thinks. It's not really a draw for most people. It just isn't. I mean, that's all over the data too. It's just always puzzling why people think that. I'm like, did you read the data on any of this? Because it's right there. You know, like I said, I mean, you can do it. You can tell people, hey, you should switch jobs. You can make more money, and they won't.
Yeah,
they won't.
I think like probably a solid 97 or 98% of people would much prefer to make less money in a job they actually enjoy than to make more money in a worse job. Like that's exactly.
Or not even a worse job, just a more comfortable job. The devil you know versus the devil you don't. Right. And the thing is, like with teaching, we have all the data. Right. The highest paid teachers are public teachers, and they're worse. It just is what it is. Like I don't know what else to tell you. Right. Like and the Catholic teachers who sometimes starve, literally, in some cases, they just do better education. But yeah, they're there for the right reasons. And again, the real issue was you got a bunch of people who say, well, money is bad and you know, greed is bad for you, but we want to give poor people money. Why do you want to make them bad? Because that's what you're doing. But you know, I don't believe that, by the way, or at least I believe that if you just gave them money, that would happen. Right. But I don't believe that them having more money would make them bad. I don't believe that at all. It very much depends how you get the money, for example. That's what makes you a good person, right? If you steal the money, you are already not a good person. If somebody gives you the money, the odds that will skew you bad versus good are really high. They're not 100%, but they're like 89%. So, you know, maybe that's what it's about.
The number of people who are poor but just need a break, you know, like, hey, if I just got a little bit of investment, was able to get a little bit of this debt off my back, I'd really be able to, versus the number of people who end up poor because they consistently make bad decisions.
Right. And that's in the data too. Like all economists actually know this, and half of them lie about it, even though it's right in their own data that they took in class. So I don't understand it. I'm just observing it and going, well, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's weird too, because you can just observe your friends. You can literally just talk to people you know, and you will discover this independently without any help. No degree required.
I tell you what was a very enlightening book for me that I read as a kid. Now, for some reason, my dad had a Dave Ramsey book lying around. And my dad does not need a Dave Ramsey book. He's very good with his money, right? Like, and he, you know, maybe he passed a lot of these habits on to me without even doing anything specifically. But I just picked this book up. And, you know, Dave Ramsey, he writes these books for people who are drowning in credit card debt.
Yep.
And, okay, you've messed up. And this is how you're going to get out of credit card debt. But you have to, like, do a really disciplined spending and all of these things, you know, and, like, really being disciplined with your money. And I just remember being like, how could people ever live like that? And so this is something that we do need to be careful with is this is something that C.S. Lewis said. I'm just going to paraphrase, is that you got to be very careful with other people's vices that you're not tempted to.
Right.
Because I don't understand how you rack up big credit card debt. Like I pay my credit card off every year. I've never taken on any debt that I didn't have any good chance of paying off. I've got a good credit score. You know, it's like, it's alien to me how that could be a problem. But I know what it's like to sit down and, you know, eat half a chocolate cake, for example.
Heretic. Speak not of such horrible ideas. Eat the whole cake, damn it.
And so if somebody with their credit card has the same lack of willpower that I do with cake or brownies, it's like, okay, if I can understand it like that, I could see why you're having a problem here.
You just reminded me we have brownie cookies in the car. I'm going to send somebody to get my brownie cookies for sure. Thanks, Father Eric. You've tempted me into a horrible vice.
Well, it wasn't scandal, though, because I didn't do anything wrong.
Okay.
If I was going to be a stumbling block, I would have actually had to do something wrong.
Fair. Still, I'm going to have brownie cookies now.
You don't have to. The agency's
No,
in your hands.
You pointed at brownies and chocolate cake. And I'm like, I have a combination of both in little bite-sized form in the car. I wouldn't have remembered that. I haven't remembered the whole time. We've had them for days.
Well, they've been cooking in there.
Not really. It's New England. Hasn't been hot. That's actually not true. When I was on the Cape, it was beautiful weather, actually. It wasn't perfect. It was mid to high 70s almost every day except one. It was like, this is great. With the convertible. We brought the convertible, which is crazy of me, but also I pulled it off and I regret nothing. Nothing. That car is fantastic, especially going over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, top down. That's what we need to do. We need to go grab you and take you over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, top down.
You picked the right days. I'm there. We've got time off in the semester, especially around the 4th of July.
Well, we got to drive up and see Bruce anyway. We go to his little thing.
I would even, to spare you the horror of driving through Washington, D.C., I'd even be willing to ride a train or a bus out of the city.
You would have to do that. My car is not going
more
back there
conveniently.
again. It's not. I wouldn't drive somebody else's car who I didn't like in DC. That's how much I don't. DC is just dangerous. Don't do vehicle in DC.
Yeah.
Everyone's got credit issues now.
Do they? Well, it looks like Dawn was able to spent a year and a half paying off $11,000. See, that's discipline right there. I don't think you actually had that big of a problem.
No.
You were able to buckle down and get your spending done, and
No, most people, they get $100,000 in and then they pay it off over 5 years, or I know that's a true story from somebody I know.
I'm sure you know all sorts of people. I think the only people more interesting than you are your friends.
And my friends are all more interesting than me, Father Eric. It's just, Well, no, and I pay attention to people's stories. Like it actually makes a big difference. That's why when people go, you don't listen, I go, are you sure about that? I really catch a lot of details that most people completely miss. So I think you're probably mistaken somehow, but
it's not that you
whatever.
It's not that you don't listen. It's just you refuse to adopt any framing that you don't like.
Yeah. Well, I don't give people the responses that they're looking for, because usually they want to poo baby, and I'm like, you did that to yourself, kid. Buckle up.
Yeah. So it's a little offsetting when you're expecting a certain response and you get something else, which is fine. Like, I don't know, whatever.
It
you
should
just
be
deal
fine.
with it, but it should be fine. But
right. Well, we're not used to it. I mean, I think that's really the complaint of the generations, is that they're not used to being told no. It's like, well, I can see why you wouldn't want to be around me, because if I think you're wrong, I'll tell you no, like right away, pretty quick. So you don't enchant yourself. That's one of the videos I've been working on. I think I'm gonna be able to do. I got to sit down, which is hard. But I woke up at a reasonable hour today and I read. Like, I just stayed in bed and read some James Bond, and I loved it. And I'm more than halfway through the book. I'm going to finish the book on vacation. I haven't finished a book on vacation in years, so I'm psyched.
Nice.
Yeah, but that means I can sit and do things. So if I can sit and go through this enchantment thing, then I got to catch all the types of enchantment and take notes live and all that. I've got it all in my head. I can't spit it all out. So that's always the problem, is just explaining simple things to people that you think they can't possibly not know this. It's like, nope, they clearly don't know any of this.
Yeah.
That's why I want to hear about this Vatican II implementation versus spirit.
It's a really when I saw Kale's video, I'm like, oh, that's a good point, right? Because like I just got into seminary, you know, and I'm in the academic mode, and it's like, oh, there's this Vatican II thing that I've got to learn about because you know I was 18 when I went to seminary, I didn't know anything, and that was fine. And we went like and encountered it via the texts, you know, sitting down, reading the texts. And that tells you something. And I do stand by, I think the only valid criteria for us interpreting something as big as Vatican II is, let's return to the sources and see what those say.
Right.
Because I don't know how else we're going to be able to agree on it, except by having something in the middle that we can all point to and say, yeah, that's what we're doing here. And
Right.
the only thing that's left of the council is the texts.
Okay.
And the effects of the texts. But when he made the point, it's like, yeah, for most people, when they hear Vatican II, especially if they're of a certain generation, they're going to remember what's actually implemented.
Right.
Like that's what they're going to think it is. And it's like, boy, how do you tell them that they're wrong? Because it's like, look, bishops went off and did Vatican II 5 years later. Mass turns into English and it's completely different. It's not completely different. It's mostly different. It's like, that's a big deal. That's a big deal right there. And we're not doing credit to the complexity of the thing when we just say, well, it wasn't according to the text.
Right. Well, and you can't explain that to people for a lot of reasons. Yeah. It's close to a sola scriptura argument. Exactly. Because of the materialism. And this is why I push back on those frames. I haven't watched this video from Kale, so maybe I'll check that one out. But this is why materialism is the better frame, right? Because it explains that. Like the materialism got into the Catholic Church too, right? Not just all the other churches and everything else, right? It didn't. Nothing explains the growth of secularism like materialism. This modernity, which is already a bad word with problems. See, navigating patterns. I have a video on it.
I have a video on it too.
Yeah, but it's the word itself is already an issue. But also, two people agree on what are the components of it, like how would you identify it, right? Whereas with materialism, it's really easy to identify. Right? You just say, oh, you're making material primary in the world as the prime mover, and it's like once you see it, and I'm not saying that me telling you is going to let you see it. Unfortunately, I wish it worked that way.
If you're stuck in materialism, it's really hard to see spirit and the spirit moving matter.
Right, but a lot of people can see materialism and spirit, like John Vervaeke's like this. Oh, I see that, right? But they privilege the material still, right? They're still stuck. So a lot of people, like a lot of Catholics, they see both, right? But they really don't. No. It's the Holy Spirit. It's not. You didn't do that, right? And that's what I was saying with Revelation earlier, right? This is something Manuel and I came up with 2 or 3 years ago now. It's like, no, you don't obtain knowledge. That doesn't happen. It's all revelations. Like, it changes everything, right? Because then it explains why it seems to come from outside of you. That's because it comes down upon you. It's not that hard, right? And then once you understand emanation in that way, or at least in a better way than most people do, then you can do away with the emergence, because materialism is all emergence. And that's where you get emergence is good from. And once you see emergence is good too, it's everywhere. It's like, oh, wow, that's just emergence is good. It's everywhere.
But it's actually like being locked into materialism is a form of blindness.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how do we fix that? It's not like you could just. So you can think of like a materialist worldview, right? It's like, okay, you're just sitting there thinking, and like you're like let's say a somewhat bright high schooler, and it's like, okay, well, what's the universe made out of? And you go to the nearest authority that you have, and the nearest authority that you have is your physics textbook, which tells you that the universe is made out of matter and energy. So you try and understand the whole world and thinking about it and putting things together as understanding it as matter and energy, right? And so basically, it's thinking that's got you into the trouble here.
But it's also...
and more thinking is going to solve the problem.
Right. But well, there's an upcoming video that Sally Joe requested of me called and maybe we won't name it this, but more information is not better. Or more information won't help. Because that's true of most things. We already know too much, and then we're adding to that. And one of the places you see that is in court all the time. People just drag up stuff, and it's like this has nothing to do with what we're here for, guys. And that drags these cases on forever, and it's ridiculous. And it is part of that materialism. But the other problem with materialism is it's super attractive because it gives you certainty, or at least pretends to, even though it doesn't. Science pretends that it has more certainty than it does, and it also typically pretends it has perfect certainty, both of which are complete lies. And then once you realize that, it's like, oh, right. But people like certainty. I'm a big fan myself. But that's not the way the world is. Right? And the thing is, you can have certainty or you can have miracles. You can't have both. And another way to say that, which is the same, it won't sound the same, but it is. You can have certainty or you can have potential. You can't have both. You're really gonna pick one. Oops. Right?
Yeah.
And then the Neoplatonists, deconstruct, or so they think. And they say, but certainty's on a spectrum, and that solves the problem. And I'm like, you didn't solve anything. You didn't solve anything.
Certainty's on a spectrum.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could say that. I'm 100% certain. I'm 50% certain, right? They always put things on a spectrum to resolve a hard paradoxic or contradiction.
Oh, well, I don't know. In the church's moral language, we've got probable certitude, we've got moral certitude, and we've got absolute certitude. So it's kind of a spectrum, but it's used for different things. It's used for, court evidence and making judgments.
Yeah.
So like the standard for making a judgment, which could affect somebody's rights in the Catholic Church, is moral certitude. You've got to be certain enough that you need to act on it.
Yeah.
That's what the moral means is okay, now I have to act.
Now you're
Whereas probable certitude is like, well, I think this one's more likely to happen based on these things, or to have happened based on these things, but not enough where I've got to act on anything. So that's the way we use a spectrum of certitude. But that's probably different than what whoever you were just referencing was talking about.
Yeah, a certain certainty. People want perfect certainty about the world so that they can act based on knowing exactly what their action is going to do.
Well, that's the brilliance of the Catholic. It's like a moral certitude doesn't mean that there's no possibility that you're wrong. It just means that
but
as somebody who's contemplated these things, you now have the certainty to act. Doesn't exclude the possibility that you're wrong.
Right, but the worst problem, and it is a worse problem, is that even if you have 100% certainty about cause and effect, you don't have 100% what we would call coverage. And so maybe you'll get exactly what you want, and maybe that will have second order effects that you don't want and that are worse, right? The quick example is the Pyrrhic victory, right? But like, oh yeah, you won the war, but you lost so many, or you won the battle, but you lost so many men that you lost the war, right? In one battle. And that's the problem, is that you can't ever know all of the effects of what you do, even if you can have 100% certainty about one or two or three of them. And so it doesn't help you. and you can't know about the follow on from those effects, the second order effects. And that just really screws with you. Right.
Oh yeah. I was taking morality classes and ethics classes in seminary, and when I realized that you couldn't actually know all the consequences of any action that you take, that's when I knew that consequentialism was wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I believed it because the professors are saying, no, we don't have a consequentialist morality. We have virtue ethics. It's like, okay, whatever that is. I was just like, oh yeah, you can't know all of the effects of your actions. It's impossible. And so how could you possibly act based on that? It's not that the consequences of your actions aren't worth considering, but they're not what has primacy. And when it's just goodness, that's all the virtue ethics stuff is. Just be good. You would like it.
The good goodness,
Yeah,
not the bad goodness.
Not the bad good. What's bad goodness?
And the extra goodly good. Well, but you see that, right? Like the Vanderklay crew was doing the good bad man thing. And I'm like, all right, there's no such thing as a good bad man. Stop taking two words that oppose each other and actually putting them together. I know you guys love opposites, but don't do that. All right, there's no such thing as a good bad man. Like, you do the right thing, and the fact that the right thing may involve violence or killing or whatever is just too bad. It's still good.
You just call them a monster.
Yeah, they can be a monster. Monsters can be good.
Yeah.
St. Christopher, it's fine. I don't.
Yeah. It's just
but I don't understand the need. I mean, that's the materialism, right? Like, oh, someone got hurt, therefore you're bad. Oh, but you're a good person because the goodness came from your bad thing. It's like, that didn't happen that way. I don't know what else to tell you. Like, you don't need to complicate the world by mixing those two things up. You can just say things that I might think of as bad actions because I'm wrong and stupid are not actually bad. Sometimes they're just necessary, and that's the way the world is. Actions in and of themselves are not good or bad. Could be. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, the Catholic tradition would say that you can, for just about anything, once you know enough about what somebody's actually doing, you can make the judgment, good or bad. And then things like intention and circumstances could either magnify or diminish the goodness or the badness of an action.
Right.
Yeah. So like the whole getting to the appropriate amount of knowledge is, I put a knife into somebody's chest. It's like, okay, tell me more about that. Oh, I'm a surgeon and I was doing heart surgery. And he asked for it. It was like, oh, okay, well, putting a knife into a guy's chest is perfectly normal then. Oh, I was robbing him. Oh, okay, now we're up. And it's like, but once you get to the point where you've got the essence of the action, it's like, yeah, either you were aligned with the good or aligned with the bad. A lot of things are just kind of mildly good. It's like, I was tired of reading, so I went for a couple laps around the block.
Well, they could be neutral. I mean, this is the discussion I had earlier today, again, with Manuel. I was like, most things are neutral. And we really have a hard time dealing with that. It's like, you eating is kind of neutral in the world. Because sometimes fasting is correct. So, there's a lot of things that are just neutral that you need to do to sustain.
Sure. I think
you
it
need
depends
that
on what
state.
level of analysis. Yeah, I think it depends on what level your analysis is talking about.
Yeah, but you need the third state for contrast. You need contrast to see. You can't say black and white is good and evil, because that creates all kinds of because nothing is pure good or pure evil. And so that doesn't work. Like, it already doesn't work. Like, you can just tell right away it's not going to work. Right? That's why you need the contrast of the neutral position. Otherwise, you can't discern whether there's more good than evil in it. For example, this is one example, but it gets down to brass tacks a lot quicker when you have three ways, because contrast between two things doesn't function actually. It allows you to sense, but not to see.
I feel like the neutral category it's like an important conceptual tool.
Well, you have to turn all the neutrality into good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's yeah. So it's like
now you have something.
By the time, but I think by the time you actually get to the action, it's like, oh, that was good, or oh, I shouldn't have done that. And then sometimes it's like, oh, maybe I overdid that.
Or maybe you did that and it didn't have an effect at all. Like, maybe it's something that you did just was a null, right? It just didn't.
Sure, yeah, and but you did it because it was the right thing to do, and it didn't work out. That's fine.
or you did it and you're like a terrible person. And because this happens, I know people this has happened to. They realize, well, that didn't work. Wait a minute, had it worked, I would have been a horrible person. I'm glad it didn't work. That has turned more people than any other condition.
Okay.
For sure.
So like trying to seduce a married woman, we'll say, and she rejects your advances, and then you're like, oh gosh, actually she was right and I was wrong.
And I was wrong.
Something like that.
Things like that happen.
Yeah.
I know people that have had, like, they've had entire awakenings from, had that worked out the way I expected, you know, and that was the outcome they wanted, and they understood what was happening. That would have been bad, but they didn't have that frame before. And I think it, you know, again, it's not really about orienting towards the neutral. You need the neutral space to do the orientation in. You can't orient without a neutral space. But it's not objective material reality. Right? It's neutrality is not that, because in objective material reality, you can't change anything. That's the scientific framework. Nothing ever changes effectively. That's why they can make moral proclamations as scientists, because nothing changes, and they're outside the world, which you can't be. By the hint, just surprise ending. You can't be outside of the. It's too late. It already happened to you. You're inside the world. I hate to bring it to you. But the neutral state is the state where you have stuff to do. And that stuff is to make more good, right? Or to fight entropy if you want. Like I can frame it in purely secular terms, which is kind of fun. Someday I'll do a video like that. I'll just frame the whole thing in secular language, just because that works actually with secular people. It actually works. It's one of those things. It's one of those areas where unfortunately you religious-y folks fail miserably, because you use some of these terms and the John Vervaeke's of the world actually don't get it, but they agree because they think they get it, but they actually miss it.
Well, I don't know if we actually know what we mean when we're talking about grace. That word gets used a lot,
and that's okay. Like, that's okay, but also if you use that with somebody who doesn't understand it and you can't explain it to them, and fair enough, I use words I can't explain all the time. It happens. You know, like whatever. I deeply know what I mean, and I'm just not smart enough to explain it. That happens with a lot of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that, but also you might be turning them away instead of drawing them in, right? Or maybe just avoid all the religious language altogether. If you could, I mean, I insist, you know, I have videos on this. That's still one of Peterson's tricks. Like, he definitely leans heavily on the secular language to point you in the direction of maybe myths aren't false. Maybe they're true, and maybe they're the most true, right? Because he makes all three of those cases separately. And I think that's, you know, the fact that he can do it in secular language is kind of amazing. And that, I think, is what people miss. Like, no, if you can do this in secular language and point people in this way, the world is attention, Jonathan Pageau, bang, right? That you know, that'll set it straight. Just a thesis,
yep.
But also practices. Exploring narrative meaning practice coming soon, hopefully, and we'll actually do a practice and show people. No, watch. This just kind of works. It's kind of cool.
Yep. It's a pity that Ted is, you know, meaningfully engaged in his community around him and attending to his family so much, because he doesn't come on as much.
Yeah, I miss Ted.
Yeah.
I just want Ted to be my friend.
He just explores. I just want him to be my friend, right? He just explores narrative meaning as naturally as anybody can.
Yeah. Well, the Convivium event, that was just fantastic. I hope we do that again soon. I would go again.
Yeah. Nobody's ever organized one of these conferences twice. Have you noticed that?
You didn't watch my talk with Catherine on Intimacy Crisis Part 2.
I did see a little bit. I saw half of it.
No, she mentioned.
She didn't sound all that committed.
Yeah. Tino turned her off to conferences, but I think she's recovered now. So, just saying.
Okay.
But I think she's recovered because, I brought it up. So do you think people would go? I'm like, oh, yeah, people will go for sure.
It's only an 8-hour drive from Fargo.
Father Eric's all in. I got to drive 2 days or fly or something. Yeah, it's a tough one.
I'm not going to camp again. That turned out to be a mistake.
Yeah.
What happened to Chino? Too much talk and not enough action?
So many bad things no one talks about, but they're not mine to retell, so I won't because I wasn't there. Also, heard a lot of things.
She hasn't done that for a while.
It kind of was like labor and delivery, especially when it's imposed upon you from people and you didn't agree to it. Sure. Could be. Yeah, when you're dragged into things that aren't your idea, it always gets tricky, right? Especially if you don't have a structure and you can't bound your role. Like the nice thing about institutions and structures and businesses and corporations and things is that your role is bound. You can always say no to things that are that ain't my job description, and people do that. The most successful people in business I've ever met do that. Actually, it's something I never learned because I just like a new problem. I can help. Sure. Stupid Mark. Yeah, just not a good idea. Yeah, having a role, having things organized really helps people to set boundaries and not get overloaded. Especially when it's not, when it's not your thing or there's no clear leader, right? No one's in charge. The nice thing about Thunder Bay is Catherine was in charge. She knew what she wanted to do. Maybe she had a little implementation problem here and there as her first conference. How could it be otherwise? But it went really smoothly. It was very special because everybody knew she was in charge. Everybody had a role, right? And everybody, fulfilled their obligations, partly because they knew what they were ahead of time. And like, there's organization like that. I've done many projects for large and small corporations. Organization like that is hard to do and worth everything. It's worth all the rest of it combined and more. And people don't appreciate that. Yeah. That is the other thing I talked about with Catherine, not on camera, unfortunately. It's like, man, I want to spend more time in Thunder Bay because it's cool. The largest above ground silver mine in the world is in the bay, under the water, kind of in Thunder Bay. It's like I never knew about any of this. So I wanted to explore more of Thunder Bay because it's quite pretty. I've got some good pictures.
But it was just raining the entire time we were there.
Right. It rained the whole way, which was a shame.
That's why my camping experience was not good. Yeah.
And I'm not doing a hostel again ever. So that's never happened. The one advantage to the hostel didn't happen for me. And I was like, it might have happened for everybody else there. I don't know. But I tended to stay at the conference longer and chit chat. And one night we just went out on the town. Also, no one is ever again going to talk about the grimy, gritty, dirty, ugly American cities. Because I've been to Thunder Bay, Canada, buddy. And now I know. And I'm not saying it's comparable to Detroit or DC or Baltimore, but also like it's a lot worse than most of the cities I've been to in the US. Sorry. It's a rough. Parts of it are really rough. Really rough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the hostel had cameras in the parking lot for a reason. And they were monitored for a reason. Which is why my beautiful BMW was safe, but still.
Yeah. What would your dream conference be, Mark?
Convivium Part 2, man. I just love Convivium. We had a great time, and
so we're going to have Richard Rowland there and Ted, those two.
Yeah. You need Richard Rowland and Ted. I'd love to have Corey up there talking. That would be great. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about like who would you like to get together, although Jonathan Pageau has now completely disappointed me with one of his recent clips, and I'm just crying all the time now. I'm not surprised, unfortunately. I'm like, I saw that might be coming down the pike, and it hit us. Defense of postmodernism, horrible capitulation to the postmodern ideas. So I mean, I'd still, I guess for conference speakers, like definitely Ted, because Ted was excellent. I'd like to hear Dr. Jim again because he's just fascinating. I would make him talk longer though, and I'd make sure he had his slides because I was just that he could do so much.
No, it was. I was really glad that the conference wasn't equal. That I just had my little bit because that's all I got. This is what I have. I've got 40 minutes. I've got 40.
You got a place to fit in, and I think that was the nice part about Symbolic World Summit.
Just for those who didn't go to the Convivium retreat, sorry about that. You missed out on a great opportunity. But I talked for about 40 minutes, and that's all I wanted. Because like 40 minutes is long for me to talk. Like usually I'm in and out in about 12 or 14. Like that's the time frame that I'm accustomed to. 40 minutes is like, oh my gosh, that's extra long right there. And Dr. Jim had 3 presentations.
3, yeah.
And I was happy that he had more time to talk because he had more to say.
Right.
And so you don't have to be equal about this, right?
Yeah, Symbolic World Summit.
Speaker,
that was
there's no need to be equal.
That was the nice thing about Symbolic World Summit was everybody had like a place to talk. But yeah, the talks were equal length because timing and just scheduling, right? So timing and scheduling wise, yes, but yeah, speaker wise, no. Like I would love to hear Pageau talk about certain topics, right? I'd love to nail Vervaeke on a couple of topics that I think he doesn't give enough time to, and I'd like to just hear his thoughts because I've never been able to figure out how he feels about some of the things he talks about. So yeah, I mean, I'd be all in on that. I definitely could listen to Richard Rowland for like months. That'd be fine. If I could drag him away from his family and force him to just, that'd be good.
No, listen, you're not thinking long term here. Imagine if he has a dozen children who are mostly like him.
I don't care.
World just a better place.
The
world's a better place.
Selfish. I just want to talk to Richard Rowland for like a few months. Sorry. I don't care if anybody else hears it either. I want to know. I'd love for you to give a talk on either this Vatican II thing because I'm still. You keep teasing me with it, and I'm like, one of these days I'm going to nail him down, and I'm going to sit and we're gonna hash this out. We almost did it at the zoo, right? But yeah, I mean. I'd love to hear either that or more about sort of your perspective in terms of church and hierarchy and how Catholicism resolves that, because that'll give me some contrast for the Orthodox, which, and I'd love to hear Corey talk. I think if we can get Corey to give a talk, that'd be cool. And hopefully he'll do his little conference in Texas. So,
I hope he's able to pull that off. But he hasn't put a date down yet, so we'll just have to wait.
We're getting late in the season too, so. Mm-hmm. Look at that! Somebody wants to hear Cale Zeldin and Father Eric. Oh, Martin Shaw. Yeah, I could.
Yeah. The burnt out Gen Xer, the energetic millennial, right?
Yeah, I gotta listen to
sometimes Cale. Sometimes Cale just sounds so sad, and maybe it's because he lives in the Northeast, where the church is even deader than it is in the Midwest. Like that might just be all there is to it.
Well, and it's Rhode Island church is massively corrupt. I mean, they had a public corruption problem well before the Boston, right? Mm-hmm. It was just less well known, but it was very well known in Rhode Island. And so that Southern New England Catholic Church was worse off in many ways. Although the freaking Boston Church, man, I still want to berserker that problem. Just saying.
Maybe God will take care of it by sending evil men to hell.
That won't make up for all the damage, and that's still the problem. I'm fairly, like I said, if you live in New England and you think you don't know somebody directly or indirectly affected by that scandal, I think you've got blinders on. Like everybody I know, every family, Catholic or not, right, was, because a lot of families have a Catholic background somewhere, right? And I mean, I lived in Lowell, very diverse city, so it's not like there's all Catholics in Lowell or anything. That's for sure. It's a bunch of Greeks. There's a bunch of Asians. There's people from all over the place. So, yeah, it was pretty devastating. In Boston in general, it's pretty devastating.
Well, it looks like Chad's putting on something in late August 2025 in Chinatown. He's got 70% of it wrapped up. We will wait with great anticipation to hear who you've got and what they're going to talk about.
Yeah. Thunder Bay 2 would be interesting, right? What will the topic be? What will Catherine want to know next?
Yeah. We'll see that.
Let's hope it happens.
Well,
let's hope it happens.
Yeah, I've got to have something to do for vacation. I don't know what to do for vacation. I just go to these conferences. They're great. That's all I want.
It's fantastic. Well, I liked the DC conference last year. That was fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I left the day after that ended, so it's kind of like the end. It was like a little vacation right at the end of my canon law school.
Yeah, I left then too. Same place. The same building.
Yeah. Very same building. There are many, many rooms in this rectory. Well, thanks for showing up, everybody. Just remember that for June and July, these are going to be happening at 7:30 Eastern, not 7:30 Central. So we'll be starting and ending earlier than we have in the past because I just don't want to stay up late, and it's my YouTube channel. For those of you who are still interested, the Moby Dick Book Club Discord server, the link is underneath. You guys are all welcome to join. We're looking like we're going to have a decision made here about when we're going to do this book club made sometime this week. So you still have opportunity to hop in there and get it done. And just remember to say your prayers and do your duty. And God loves you, and take care of the rest.
Patriarchy is good. Watch the video.
Also that. And God is the patriarch of the entire universe. So good night, and God bless you all.